Hello everybody, and again welcome to this part of the Ethics of Social Sciences projects presentation and the In Conversation With part of it. I'm delighted to have a conversation about research ethics with Dr Ayat Nashwan. And before we start talking about ethical issues in relation to Dr Ayat's experience of research ethics, I would just like to ask you, Ayat, could you introduce yourself and tell us what you do and the main research that you have been involved with for the last however many years?
Yeah, thank you, dear Rachel, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to meet you here and also to hear about your fantastic work. My name is Ayat Nashwan. I'm Associate Professor at the Department of Sociology and Social Work at Yarmouk University in Jordan. I graduated with PhD in social work from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, 2014. And since then, after I came to Jordan, I was actually appointed as the Director of Refugees, Displaced Persons and Forced Migration Studies Center, and most of my research and international projects focusing on Syrian refugees integration in the labor market.
So research in relation to refugees is challenging, I think, and obviously there are going to be lots of ethical issues in relation to that type of research. What would you say have been the main research issues, research ethics issues that you, or challenges that you have dealt with in field work as part of your work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I believe there are many obstacles. I know as a local researcher, someone who speaks the same language, share the same tradition, cultural aspects, maybe my mission would be much easier. So this is the main thing to start with. But I believe that research fatigue is one of the most dominant issues that refugees and researchers face. So whenever I want to go and do research, those people got interviewed by hundreds of people, specifically with the increasing number of internationals and locals focusing on research with refugees after 2011 and and after, since the refugees came to Jordan. Speaking about 1 million point for refugees in Jordan, 1 million point for, that means we have 1.5 million refugees, and there is lots of huge efforts, specifically in the camp. So I can tell you, research fatigue can be a major issue in the camp more than in the urban areas. This is why I selected, or I decided to do most of my research in the urban areas for many reasons. One of them, I want to avoid people who really think that researchers will come, take information and never come back. Also, I believe the urban areas are the natural way of living where people should be, because I feel really kind of against incumbent policy as a person and a researcher.
That's a really fascinating take on research fatigue. And I know, Ayat, that even in the UK, there are regions where, because universities are placed in those particular regions, that the locality has been researched over a period of time, over many years, 30 years sometimes, where successive researchers keep on going back to the same people. But I hadn't considered that in terms of, your country and refugee camps. And when you say about research fatigue, what is the response then of some of those refugees that are there when researchers go out not really thinking about it and ask them if they will be participants in their research?
Yeah, the responses are varies, to be honest. So sometimes people will be very polite, not to say no, we get bored of all of that. So they will give you information. But recently, one of the research that I read, that sometimes people will give misinformation. They will give wrong information just because they don't want you to be upset, because you did not really, they don't want to tell you, no, I don't want to do this interview.
Okay.
So yeah, this is one of the aspects. And also other aspects that people sometimes, because of incentives, because, you know, also the case of incentives, there are two opinions. Some people think, yeah, this will encourage people to do the research. Others will say, what about if people accept to be, you know, participants or to be participant in the research because of these incentives and did not give the accurate information. So there is lots of debates actually, not only in Jordan, but everywhere about the incentives for research. So I believe research fatigue can affect not only the people themselves that who believe, yes, researchers will come, take information and never come back to improve our lives, and also the researchers themselves. And I can tell you in Jordan, after 2011, 14, there was a huge number of researchers who came and studied refugees issues. And you can find the same person who interviewed multiple times. This is just normal in Jordan.
And of course, that links to, you know, non-maleficence or not doing harm to individuals. And I guess overburdening individuals can be harmful. And in a sense, it actually does affect the findings of the research as well. So that links to both methodology and rigor of research. What would you say then are some of the other main issues that you've had to deal with?
Using translation. Because in many ways, I believe that people intend not to have someone in between the researcher and the respondent. So in many ways, how can we guarantee that the translator do their job perfectly? I mean, there is varies of levels, varies of qualifications. So sometimes if the translator made a mistake in the translation, how can we guarantee the accuracy of the data? So I believe there are some solutions like local, bilingual, let's say, researcher who could really assist the international. This is why I really encourage international researchers to work with locals for many reasons, not only the culture, but also to reduce this barrier. As you know, our relationship with the respondent, they want to give us information, but if I don't speak the language, then it will be very hard on me to express my opinion. And I cannot really trust that the translator will give the information exactly as how I want to give it. So I believe this is another issue, specifically with researchers coming from outside speaking French or English, while the respondents speaking only Arabic. So this is another issue that I really want to highlight here.
And this is really about authenticity, isn't it? About what is being said and how it is being translated again into the end product, the outcomes, the findings. So it's very important. Okay. And any other ethical issues?
Yeah, I believe also sometimes issues related to culture and sensitivity. So whenever we have researchers, I give them an orientation before they go to the field, because gender issues is one of the ethics. If there is a researcher, a man researcher who are going to visit a female-based home or a house full of female, I should inform them in the beginning, because gender issue can be something need to be informed before. Also, it's preferable that the lady to do research with ladies, the men do research with men. I think this is one of the cultural aspects that need to be clear from the beginning. As you know, female researchers' mission will be always much easier in our countries, so they can enter houses, interact with women, also because of the largest number of women. So more than half of the refugees who came to Jordan are women, half of them actually under 18. So all of these facts, will give us priorities. As you know, many of refugee women who are widows, they lost their husbands are missing. So this female-focused research need to be taken into account when it comes to cultural sensitivity. Mixed gender activities need to be kind of avoided to some extent. So I deal with researchers almost every month. So I'm kind of aware of all of these issues.
So know your audience and know your sample and know your region and know your culture and know your country is really key. And I think that's really important that people think about that even before they're applying for the grant funding, that they think about some of those issues. Is it actually doable? Is it justified in terms of what they're hoping to do? And those are ethical issues, yes. Okay. And any others?
Yes, some sensitive cases like traumatized refugees. This is really need to be studied in advance because you don't know when you will trigger the trauma. Many of Syrian refugees, I cannot say all of them, but many of them, they have nightmares, they have trauma issues, PTSD. The kids, some kids in Jordan, when they hear the plane above their house, they think, yeah, they recall the events in Syria and the bombing. So we really need some interventions. As a researchers, I need to be equipped with reference. Let's say I want to do something, I want to do research. I need to have within my team a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Otherwise, I might really bring sadness and harm to the people that I will either interview or work with. So I really want to highlight that there are some sensitive cases that really need to be treated differently or in a good manner or a specific way.
And do you think that that also applies to the researchers themselves, that maybe they should have some clinical supervision because they may well be coming across situations that are incredibly traumatic and, you know, they may feel that they can't actually do anything about those, that as a researcher you're going into chart and note down the experiences of people, and you're not actually going in there necessarily to help, and that can be quite tricky.
Yes.
How do you negotiate and how do you mitigate against some of those issues for the researchers themselves?
Yeah, actually self-care and secondary trauma is real. So we really need to expect anything in the field. So I always make my colleagues and researchers aware that you should expect everything. Secondary trauma is something you should expect. And also you need to take self-care because you hear lots of stories. And many of these stories are traumatic. So they really need to have plan in case if they face any of these cases or any of these situations, how to deal with it. And I think, yes, having the psychosocial services around, and actually whenever we write IRB, we always put this plan that we can refer this case to the psychiatric. Even ourselves as a researchers, we really need these services in many ways.
Well, I think that everything that you've been saying, Ayat, leads to one word, which is preparation. Yes. And clearly it's very important that people prepare themselves and prepare their study in order to take on board some of these ethical issues. And I guess that is one of the really beneficial things about going through ethical review, that it makes you think about these issues and it makes you prepare. And so that means that it's much more than just a tick box exercise. It's just much more than a bureaucratic exercise. It's actually really preparing you as a researcher to go into the field. So I think what those things that you have been focusing on are incredibly important and very valuable. Time is ticking on. Is there anything else that you would like to especially bring out?
Yeah, I would like to add, Rachel, that these constraints or these directions, let's say, are really important, I believe, more in qualitative research, more than quantitative. Because in quantitative, as you can see now with Corona, with COVID-19, many people distribute these surveys online. But with qualitative, I prefer that should be done face-to-face, one-to-one, and this is really deep. So I would like to focus or to highlight that this is really need to be taken into account specifically with qualitative research.
Yes, and I think that there's an important conversation to be had there, Ayat, about what type of methodology is the most appropriate, and we could almost say ethical, to use in these situations. So a kind of a closed questionnaire about trauma and what experience people have had is maybe not appropriate and is not sensitive enough. Whereas if it's a qualitative in person or online interview, maybe much more, how can we say, less harmful than a quantitative questionnaire. So, I mean, maybe there is something there that people think about as well. Would you agree?
Yes, actually, I would totally agree with you. Plus, taking into account the politics. So whenever you have, for example, focus group discussion, and you have women, let's say from the host community, I will give you practical experience, and you have Syrian women, you cannot really gather them in the same meeting. Why? Because maybe they will have different political opinions. Maybe Syrian women would like to speak freely about the right of expression in the host community. And I'm speaking about, any general community. So we really need to be careful about the politics and how can we gather even people with FGDs, because we do FGDs a lot in the qualitative research. And sometimes we don't really think what is the level of freedom that the Syrian woman can speak in front of the, let's say, the Jordanian woman who really gather in the same room together. What if she want to criticize, let's say, the system? What if we want to criticize the assistant? She will not speak freely if she knows that there is another lady from the host community that is hearing. So this is just practical experience about how can we really benefit the most from the research and also give the respondents self of agency and freedom.
And empowerment, yes. And I guess what you're really bringing home to us here, Ayat, is the importance of confidentiality,
yes,
of privacy, so that people are, there's not other people overhearing maybe, but also anonymity, that people's names are not used, their personal information is not used, so it cannot be traced back to that particular person, and that the data, there is a clear data management protocol and planning so that information doesn't go where it shouldn't go. So I think the sensitivity in relation to the particular work that you're doing in Jordan in relation to refugees really has to be thought through. And I think what you're saying there is incredibly valuable, and I'm sure will be very helpful to people that are applying for funding at this stage, and also later on going out into the field if they're successful. Is there anything else you'd like to end with, or?
Yeah, I think that's all. And thank you so much for the valuable questions. And I hope that can benefit really the audience who will see this.
I'm sure it will, Ayat, and thank you so much for your time and all the work that you're doing in Jordan. It's really worth doing and justifiable. Thank you so much.